Hi, this is Dan Hickey. This is a talk that I presented with Grant Chartrand at the IU Online Conference on November 10th, 2017. I'm a professor and for a couple more months the program coordinator of the Learning Sciences program at Indiana University. So, part of the problem we're trying to solve here in this talk is what I call the conundrum of formative assessment. Uh, Formative assessment is effective, but it's really laborious. The amount of pedagogical content knowledge needed to provide formative feedback is quite expensive. It requires a lot of very specialized expertise, both with the domain. There's sort of an additional, in addition to PCK, there's sort of an APCK. Like people know how to do formative assessment in the domain. A lot of people don't know how to do it very well. Even when done well, it typically cuts into instructor time. A lot of times instructors want to give more feedback to actual assignments because the feedback on assignments is often used by students. Feedback on formative assessments often goes unused, and sometimes that's because that feedback is unusable. Furthermore, the focus on assessment items can often result in much narrower learning, right? When you reduce content to a specific assessment, a known answer item, so to speak, that's often not the sorts of disciplinary discourse that you really want to see happen in a class. Then when you move to online, everything is harder. And so the sort of assessment TPCK is particularly costly. It's another skill set to know how to use a potentially new learning management system, both to administer formative assessments but to provide feedback. That's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the enduring challenge of summative testing. Uh, right, you really don't want to reduce your courses to test prep, first of all. Um, but then when you go online, you really have a challenge because you're really forced to use open book exams. A lot of students figure out pretty quickly that because they can just sort of not do the assignments and learn what they need to do when the exam comes up. Now, LMSs, they automate testing, but they still often require proctoring. And students and faculty hate proctoring. Proctors are expensive. But now there's a whole other problem, and that is the security of them. The stakes are high. The only evidence you have of student learning is an online exam, and you use a proctor. There's a good chance that somebody like executive academics there on the right are going to help you do it. Now, if you notice that first article in Inside Higher Ed said in 2012 a handful of services. It's not a handful of services anymore. Executive academics and others, there's just dozens of them out there competing. And here's what Executive Academics says. Here's your basic setup for defeating uh, proctors. Here's while you do it relaying answers while in the testing room, and here's how you do it when you're doing it remotely. It's pretty straightforward. In this case, it's expensive, but if you go on the web, you'll see that there's really a whole ecosystem of cheating around various lockdown browsers. So these are two really pretty big problems for online assessment. So I'm going to talk to you today about our efforts that Grant and I are working on to resolve this problem. Ed Psych P540 is called Learning in Cognition and Education. Grant took this course with me a year ago in my certificate program, but now he's actually taking it as he joined our PhD program, taking it online. And so that was really helpful because he was able to sort of approach this little research project we're doing around this course from the perspective of a student that's done it. Now in this recording, I'm probably not going to be able to, obviously won't be able to speak for Grant, but Grant does have a lot of interesting thoughts. He was really able to shed some interesting light on, confirm some of my assumptions about what students were doing, but really helped me question some of my other assumptions. So this is a tough course to teach, very diverse body of students ranging from future doctoral students to, busy principals taking two online courses. It's a really vast body of abstract knowledge. You've got stuff like, encoding specificity, really sort of detailed cognitive psych stuff. There's a plenty of accountability for it. The adjuncts who are currently teaching the course give the same exams as I did and as when other faculty teach it. It's a required course for several PhD programs. This moved into Canvas in 2015 and started adjuncts. And again, Grant took this course in summer of 2016. Had a great team of graduate students working with me over the years, typically funded on other projects, but helping out on this project. We've published 3 or 4 papers on it now. This is what P540 looks like. You can see there that Foundations of Cognition and Education is the first module. The second one is Implications More Applied. And then the third one actually the third module includes one chapter in each of the 5 primary academic disciplines. The important thing is in the first 10 assignments, those are individually completed assignments. Students post their own, this thing I call a Wikifolio. And then on the third week of the third module, the students come together, like so in chapter 11, in that week, the students in the literacy group do a group wiki, the other students in the other groups do a stripped down assignment where they still learn about learning in the context of literacy, but not as intensively. But the important thing about this course is I'm still expecting them to be attending to the content in the other in all 5 of those weeks, and that's where the assessment issue becomes pretty important. I assign students to I call them networking groups, and there you can see their group wikis down at the bottom. This is a home page for the thing that I call a Wikifolio. In Canvas, this is literally just a student-generated page. I use discussions. Each student generates a new discussion each week. This allows there to be threaded comments directly on student-generated artifacts, a kind of an important thing in my model of pedagogy. My model is, I call it PLA, Participatory Learning and Assessment. It consists of these 5 design principles. The talk that I did last year at IU Online Conference really focused on the first 3. In this talk, I'm really going to sort of blow through those pretty quickly and focus really on the last 3 that I think other people can probably use, regardless of whether or not they use the models of engagement that are represented by the first 2. First principle, use public context. This is kind of important to me. You want to problematize knowledge from each learner's perspective. So almost all of the work that happens in my course happens in public. Students can look at each other's work. There are no known answer questions in the public space. Students instead identify their own particular contexts in which to learn about the course concepts, applying them. So in this case, come up with an instructional goal or a learning goal. Describe a context. You can make one up. The important thing is that it has to be sort of personal and it has to be something that's interesting to the students. So when we get to chapter 4, right, so they're learning about encoding. This is a really complex thing about long-term memory. So they reiterate their instructional goal, they read the chapter, and in this case, a centerpiece of these chapters is 6 different mnemonic strategies. And they're asked to literally rank the relevance of those strategies in light of their own instructional goal. And then, and only then, do they consider the appropriateness of mnemonics in their particular instructional context. We have them follow that same strategy, rank encoding frameworks, and then have them identify 5 or more relevant specifics from the chapter. This is really important for the assessment part because we tell them that they should look at the bolded terms in the chapter and they should study them well enough to appreciate, to find the ones that are most relevant to them, both to learn them, but also because that's what's going to be on the summative exam at the end of each of the modules. So this is how we use the assessments of the test to motivate students to engage with what otherwise might be kind of a tough slog. This is actually a more advanced level textbook we use in this course, and it's really not, it's a little harder than most first courses in learning. This has been very successful in getting lots of engagement. There you see the average number of words per Wikifolio for the individual in yellow, and then the group wikis in gray. Now it's important that there's no minimum number of words required, right? And that's a really key thing, is you're not saying, oh, you must write this many words. We're trying to motivate them with the assessments to let them know that this engagement is really crucial to learn this stuff, because in the end, you're going to need to represent it on an exam. Second principle is encourage and reward productive local disciplinary engagement. So when someone is commenting to someone on their own work or leaving a comment for someone, that's what we call local. So that means that they're interacting in public, but it's between particular individuals. And this is a really good opportunity for what Randy Engel calls productive disciplinary engagement. It's really where the sort of the abstract disciplinary knowledge in the textbook is being applied to sort of the nascent disciplinary practices represented by their instructional goal, and making lots of connections. The important thing is you want to foster this PDE so that it can be rewarded and recognized. So in this case, we actually tell them what PDE is, and at the bottom there you can see that we have them assign PDE stamps, and these are literally just questions or comments that start with 3 ampersands. So turns out to be a really good way of getting students to not sort of go off and off topic, but really focus on the course topics and but really engaging with each other. You can see there at the bottom, I agree with your post and with the reply. They're commenting on a particular piece of engagement that occurred in public. And if you were to read that carefully, you'd appreciate that it's a super complicated issue that second student is reiterating. So in awarding that stamp or badge, whatever we call it, we've changed it around, that's additional kinds of productive disciplinary engagement. Here you see, even though these comments are not required, we generate lots of them, and most of them occur in part of threaded comments. So that's some nice evidence of the kind of engagement that we can make happen with those first two. Here you see that sliced another way. Again, that's a lot of engagement. You can see quite a few of those PDE stamps. We've studied those stamps in particular and shown that they do get rewarded for productive engagement, and the act of awarding them generates additional engagement. So the Wikifolios generate a lot of text and comments. Don't grade it. We don't grade any of it. If you grade it, you really undermine the sort of participation. Instead, we really grade reflections on their PDE. This builds on Melissa Grisolfi's notions of consequential engagement. So there's really 3 types of very carefully worded reflections. Contextual engagement. How suitable was your instructional goal? It turns out that if you can't reflect on this, you didn't do the engagement. Right? So when a student says, well, I would never use mnemonics in my course, it wouldn't be appropriate in my English language arts, but I can see why the foreign language instructor uses them. That illustrates some pretty deep understanding of the concepts. Collaborative engagement is just, whose work did you cite? So a lot of people will say, they might not even leave a comment, but they might say in their collaborative engagement, I really found it really helpful to look at this person's and this person's work. And then finally, consequential engagement. So we're trying to get them to abstract their ideas here and think about them more generally. That's a really crucial part in transfer, building on Rob Goldstone's work, this notion of concreteness fading. You want them to begin thinking about these things in the abstract. This is the setup for them to think about it in the abstract in assessments, which are typically much more abstract than assignments. So here you see that's the average number of words per reflection. We get quite a bit of words. Again, there's no requirement on the length. If you're interested, there's more elaboration on those principles from the same context in this course at EDUCAUSE Review. But now I really want to dive into these last ones. I'll stop, take any questions. So this fourth principle reflects a little bit of rethinking on my part, some really helpful pushback from the students and some input from my more conventionally minded peers. So what you do is offer ungraded, open-ended items and performance tasks. I'm actually now introducing multiple choice assessments as well, as I'll show you. You want to make sure you cover the big ideas in the assignment, and it's okay at this point to introduce known answer questions, right, where people are actually abstracting the content away from the personalized context and beginning to think about it more abstractly. Now, giving the kind of individualized feedback that this typically calls for really can be super laborious for instructors, to the point that many instructors don't do it because they don't have time. They'd rather spend their time engaging with student assignments, and they just skip the formative assessments altogether. I think that's a big mistake. Now, here's where my rethinking comes in. I'm saying use to re-engage and remediate before my wording of the assignments really emphasize the expectation that items themselves have limited formative value beyond the correct answer. And I just don't think that's true anymore. I've really been influenced by Rob Goldstone's work on transfer and concreteness fading, but also realizing that their engagement with the text and the answers really can go beyond the answers to the specific item. So it's not really true that all you get in formative feedback is the correct answer to the item. But I really do think that there's untapped formative potential here when it's situated correctly. So here are the current instructions for the quiz. We strongly encourage them to first try to complete each item from memory. Summative assessment of their prior engagement, right? They should get a sense of a reward. They should be proud because they knew the answer to that item. We let them know that if you can't answer these items from memory, even if you go in and find the answer, you're probably not going to be ready for the exam. But then we give them these very specific steps. So try to answer each item from memory. If you don't recognize the correct answer, then go and refer back to the textbook and review that information. After you submit your response, you should really study that response. And if you're still confused, you should go back and dig in some more. So what's important is there's several different kinds of items. The crucial thing is this: almost everyone in an online class is going to Google even the formative assessments. I've confirmed this with my students, right? So here's a good example. Provide an example of when shallow processing is preferable to deeper processing, and justify your example. So here's one potential answer. This is the answer that Grant actually gave. Now, Grant could have gone in and looked. If he had been paying attention, he'd know to look in the index for levels of processing. This would take to really a fairly extended consideration of this treatment. That would be really helpful if he went back and reviewed levels of processing in the context of. Notice here that that's coming from simply psychology. Now, this gets at something that's really important, and that is that so many people are asking Google this question that it's pushing the question out using linked data directly to your browser. So when you're doing this process I'm about to show you, you can really get a good sense of whether or not a lot of other people ask that question to the extent to which the information is presented in your browser, and it's often presented alongside people also ask. So you will often see that the exact questions you asked isn't listed first, but some version of it will be listed down below. So here's this simply psychology where that came from. Clearly, reading this would be a helpful review of the content that was in the textbook. So here you can see a much longer answer that we've provided. So we're really encouraging students. We believe that this context really sets students up to actually read a fairly terse but detailed, dense explanation because they've been immersed in it. It's a very natural thing to go in and see if, oh, did I leave anything out here? Is there anything about this concept that I don't understand? And again, if they're still completely confused, then they really do need to go back and study some more. Now we're experimenting with this for the first time. We're actually doing a quasi-experimental study. We've introduced this in one of 2 identical classes this semester. I'll have data on this in about 2 weeks. So here you see a pretty good multiple choice item, right? So this is one that which is following is not an advantage of mnemonics. It's kind of a hard question to answer. So if you give the correct answer, it's going to elaborate on why that's the correct answer. If you give the incorrect answer, it's going to give you some information. So we're spending a lot of time, this is what Grant's really focusing on, is what's our theory of action? We don't really have one yet about what to put in the incorrect answer. We have some hunches that we're testing out. Again, we'll have a much better idea when we interview some of these students after this class is over. So finally, measure achievement discreetly. I put my face up here because I've gotten a lot of pushback on this one. A lot of my colleagues in learning sciences disagree vehemently about using multiple choice achievement tests. I believe that standards-oriented achievement tests have very useful, albeit very narrow uses. If you want to measure gains using pre-tests, if you want to compare gains in different sections, if you want to document improvement, you really need. It's very difficult to do this with performance assessments for a whole bunch of reasons. In addition to just not being able to give enough items, there's a really difficult problem of the alignment of your curriculum and performance assessments, and you can get around that in multiple choice items because you just give a lot of items, and we draw items literally from the item test bank. Now, they serve a really good job in motivating students. They reward students who've engaged, but they also catch the slackers, the ones that are trying to race through the assignments and maybe cut and paste their way through their Wikifolio. You want to refine your tests, but don't teach to them. Now, the item analysis routines that I'll show you in your learning management system can help you out here. You want to aim for about an 85% average score, normal distribution, with just one or two students getting a perfect score. Again, I usually select my item from the publisher item banks. It turns out professional item writers are much better than most people are. Now, it's important though that you want to withhold item level feedback, so the students only know what their overall score on the exam was. You want to use difficult, sort of best answer items that don't have an obvious, correct answer. Most importantly of all, you want to limit the time. I give about 2 minutes per item on my exams. So to elaborate in Canvas, again, we're trying to avoid using these intrusive, expensive proctors. Canvas is a very well-designed assessment tool. So it's got multiple item types. Um, Now, there's three types of multiple choice items. I'll elaborate on this, but there's the difference between best answer and known answer. With the best answer, with a known answer, you can have items where the known answer is in the stem. It means that you only have to search one thing in Google. Conversely, you can have known answer items where you would have to search all four of the items, and that's a lot harder, or maybe three of them to rule it out. What you're really after, though, is to have a non-trivial number of items that are these best answer items that are impossible to search. Now, the time constraint is a strong motivating factor to learn content. You display all the items at once. Students can use all the time they have to work through the items, but the students who engage with the textbook, their peers, and their assignments, it's a lot easier for them to use the textbook, to use Google, to search for the answers for even difficult items. So here you see these three types of items. They're on the left. Perception, right? Known answer in the item stem. If you Google perception, you'll find the answer to that item. Now, if you look at the item on the right, you really have to look up all four of those responses. That's a very difficult thing to do in 2 minutes, whereas question 2 there at the bottom, you're simply not going to Google that, and I'll show you what I mean here. So perception refers to, right, so if you just select that text and right answer in Google, it pulls up the search page, and there you see this question is asked so often that it's actually projected over JSON LD into your browser along with alternate versions of the question below. Super, super easy. And indeed, in the relatively small course, we see that 100% of the students, 14 of the students got that item correct. Now, if we go to this item, you'll see that you'd have to go in and search for all of those items. And this is a much more complicated affair. And this is an affair that really favors students who have studied. Um, so go on through this there. Right, so that's a much more difficult challenge. It's one that a student who studied is still recognized. They'll do better. And you see with this item that indeed this was a much harder item. 79% answered it correctly. Now, this is a particularly good item because of that discrimination index, the so-called D. D is provided in all learning management system, and this is the extent to which the students got the item wrong, who got the item wrong, did poorly on the exam overall. And a D of 0.56 tells you that those three students who got the wrong answers were among the lowest scoring students in the class. And I could show you that that indeed was the case. And that's how this, if you had high scoring students get it wrong, you might have a very low or even a negative D. And that would tell you that's probably not a very good item. So now when we get to this third item that I showed, when you Google it, you get nothing. Right. You would really, this is an item that is quite difficult. Right. You go to advanced ed psychology, you'd search around. No, you're not going to find it. You go to Google, it's probably not. So you could go and search them all again. Here's what you see is that, again, this item had a very high D. This was a different class. We selected this one to show an example of a high D. And in this case, there was one student who got it wrong, but that one student, again, was a very low scoring student. So here's what I mean by the distributions we're looking for. Here's the distributions from a recent class. You see just one or two students getting a perfect score and a relatively normal distribution with a mean performance around the mid-80s. You want to adjust your exams. You want to throw out items that are too easy and find new items to replace them. So This has gone pretty well. Some of the students, they complain that the course is a lot of work and nonetheless give a very high rating overall as the course being outstanding. Students expect online courses to be easy, and it's kind of a challenge to get good evaluation scores and have a truly rigorous course. And I'm really proud of these scores, and I'm happy that my adjunct is also getting very high scores. Do much, much better than the other online courses at IU. So currently, we're extending the formative assessments in one of two identical sessions of P540. We've added more constructed response and some new multiple choice items that we're playing around with. We're going to look and see if this impacts their engagement on the assignments. And then next semester, we're going to try something. There's some interesting other formats. Binary multiple choice from Jim Popham looks like a very interesting multiple choice item, possibly both for formative and summative. Ordered multiple choice from Derek Briggs. This is where you're using the idea of learning progressions. And I'm also really intrigued with video-based performance assessments to see what I can do with that, both as formative and summative assessments. Thank you very much. There's a lot of stuff about this work at my blog, which is Remediating Assessment. And here you can see some of the articles that we've published about this work, and plenty more to come, we hope. So you can email me, dthikey@indiana.edu, if you have